Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Plan Your Intelligent Information Management Strategy in 2018. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are Bob Larrabee from AIIM and Greg Milliken from M-Files. And M-Files is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all the widgets that are available to you. And Group Chat is one of those widgets that's available to you, and you open this by clicking the icon that's along the bottom. With Group Chat, you will be able to text chat with each other and also with a few of us from here at AIIM. Do ask questions of the presenters throughout the hour using the Q&A feature. We will hold them until the end, where we should have about 5 to 10 minutes to answer them, but you can also use this feature to ask for technical assistance. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list, and that's to the right of the slide area. There's also a few other documents and links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. Just click in that resources section at any time, and the resource will open in a new browser tab, so you can save that and read the information after the webinar. And at the end of the webinar, a brief survey will open in your browser, and it's also in the widgets below the slide area. So we'd appreciate it if you take a few moments to offer your feedback and suggestions for other topics for us to cover as well. And as always, this webinar is being recorded, and it's being posted. It will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. So now I'd like to introduce the featured speakers that we have with us today. Bob Larrabee is the Vice President and Chief Analyst of Market Intelligence at AIIM, and Bob is an expert in the application of advanced technologies and process improvement to solve business problems and enhance business operations. With over 30 years of industry experience, including product management, R&D, marketing, sales, and education, his passion is to share his knowledge and experience with organizations seeking to improve their operations, embrace technology, and drive their business forward. We also have with us Greg Milliken, who's the Senior Vice President of Marketing at M-Files. And Greg brings more than 20 years of management experience in a variety of technology companies to his role, where he oversees worldwide marketing initiatives. And prior to M-Files, Greg served as CEO of Alibra, a 3D CAD/CAM software vendor. He was also previously a vice president of marketing for Knowledge Revolution, an engineering software vendor. And he also co-founded Accel Graphics, a 3D graphics hardware provider. And so a wealth of experience with both of our speakers who are here with us today. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Bob Larrabee to begin our talk. Bob?
Well, thank you, Teresa, and thanks for letting me be here, and to Greg for being here with us, and also to M-Files for being the underwriter of this event. Without you guys, it wouldn't be possible for us to be able to do this. And thanks for everybody for joining us, both here in North America and around the world. We're glad that you are able to participate and sit in with us to talk about these different things. And by all means, absolutely send us your questions. We'll get to as many as we can, as many as possible, either during this session or certainly afterwards. We'll try to get back to you as quick as we can. Teresa mentioned that there's a resource list available to you. By all means, take a look at what's there. There's some great information available to you. Certainly click over there and download the information that's available to you from our underwriter partner there at M-Files. So to start things off, let's talk about intelligent information management. And, you know, information really, as the currency that fuels and funds digital transformation, information really is the most important asset that you have. And AIIM believes that there is a core set of information-driven capabilities that are necessary for achieving business transformation. And this is what we call Intelligent Information Management, or IIM. And you're going to hear a lot about this as we move forward through this year and into the future. And what it comprises of is these basic steps. is rationalizing and modernizing the information infrastructure. And we're going to talk about all of these as we go through these presentations. Digitizing your core business processes, optimizing collaborative environments for customer and employee experiences, automating governance and compliance, and leveraging deep learning and machine learning capabilities. Now, a lot of these things you've been hearing about, but we're going to explore these a little bit deeper as we go forward through this presentation. So these are the key elements that we talk about when we talk about Intelligent Information Management, or AIIM, and that's an acronym that you're going to start hearing a lot about. And so when we look back and we look at some of the information that we gathered through 2017, leading us to all of this and talking about the intelligent workplace and understanding what's going on in the world today. One of the things that we found was 79% of the folks that we talked to told us that BPM and Process really is significant or imperative for the success of their business. In fact, 45% said that it's significant, but 34% told us that it really is imperative for their business. So process is becoming really a central focus. And 57% of the folks that we talked to said business improvement and automation focus is on their customer experience, their focus is on the customer experience. And so this is really becoming an essential part of business attention, right, and where businesses are focused these days. And so this is something that I think is extremely interesting in the consumer market and in the user segment. And Greg, I'm kind of curious what you guys are seeing these days. These are interesting statistics, 79%, 57% focusing on the customer experience and so on. So what are you seeing in relation to this?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bob. And just want to say thanks to everybody as well for spending the time with us today. But yeah, I would say that we see that workflow automation, business process automation are in use in a vast majority of our customers today. So, and in fact, that's when we begin to see very significant gains in ROI and efficiency start to kick in. I mean, clearly there's a lot of benefits with some of the core foundational elements of just better organization and classification, check in and check out, the ability to manage revisions and versions. But this idea of automation and consistency in execution really we find is when these deployments start to take it to a new level. And I would just provide an example of one company that we work with, Lars Krogius. It's a European-based provider of claims-related services to the insurance industry and other risk carriers. They're a Lloyd's agent, focus on marine, auto, business interruption. They have seen gains of 150% in their collection of data. You can imagine when you're processing claims, you're collecting various forms, photographs, you're speaking to people, you're capturing that information to really build up that assessment of the claim and then making the decision on how it gets paid out. So I think when we really see people step to that level of automating their business is when those big gains come in. And it actually also plays a role in reduction of error. If you think about automating processes and allowing people to not have to think about, hey, am I sending it to this person? Are they getting the right document? Am I getting response in time? The idea of all of that being sort of codified in a process, I think really starts to shape how a business can perform. So indeed, Bob, I'd say what we've seen corresponds directly to the data that you guys have collected as well. So with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. And that means, with all of what you said there, one of the things that comes to mind is any disruption in that would be of serious consequence. And we did ask that question in our study from the State of the Information Management last year, really the title of it was State of Information Management, or Business is Digitally Transforming or Stuck in Neutral. And one of the things that we found was that 12% of the people we talked to said serious disruption for them occurs after 15 minutes of a major outage of their systems. And 33% said it really happens after 1 hour. So think about that. 15 minutes, if they can't get to their information, this is a very serious situation for them. And 33% said, yeah, within an hour, we're really in a world of hurt. So this is a very serious situation now. And, I think this number is a bit conservative, to be honest with you. It kind of brings me back to the first point of rationalizing and modernizing the information infrastructure and being prepared. But also, we have to look at extending that infrastructure to meet the needs of today's business and the workers that are out there that can be kind of stuck, right? Because we're looking at working anywhere, anytime today. I mean, we could be out in the field, we could be in the cloud, above the cloud, right? We could be up in the air traveling, and so we need that information, right? We need to be able to get to that information, and so when a major disruption or a major outage occurs, that disruption can be extremely serious for us. And so this is one of the things that I think we really have to take a serious look at and be prepared, should disruption occur. So, with that in mind, Greg, what are your thoughts on this? What are you seeing with some of your customers?
Yeah, well, I see sort of two dimensions of this. One is obviously this notion of modernizing infrastructure and providing mobile access, anywhere, anytime access. The cloud has been a real key part of that, but also in this idea of protection against these disruptions in service or disaster recovery. I think this is probably one of the most exciting areas of innovation in this market, whether we think of it as the ECM market in the past, or as Gartner has begun to describe the market as content services platforms. Excuse me, cedar fever is high in Austin these days. But we've seen literally almost 4x the growth in our cloud business versus our standard business, and our overall business is growing quite fast, if you will. So literally over 120% growth at InFiles in cloud, and there are a number of key drivers of that. Excuse me, just clearing my throat. One of them, which relates to this service outage, is this area of disaster recovery. And we've seen a lot of interesting use cases develop in similar ways. Another very similar kind of use case would be archiving. I mean, imagine you're working potentially, and think of the notion of moving between cloud and on premises as well, and that relates to hybrid. But we're all familiar with some of the common benefits of the cloud around redundancy and geographic distribution, scalability, up and down, easier mobile access. But this last element of disaster recovery, or this last aspect, we found to be quite compelling, particularly as it relates to hybrid deployment, and the notion that even if, say, our business is growing quite fast in the cloud, another interesting data point I'll give is that the penetration of cloud into the ECM market or CSP market is still quite low. So this industry is kind of a laggard in that regard. But one of the elements that's actually assisting in this transition, at least from our experience, is the ability to deploy in a hybrid environment. So while some companies are not yet ready to give up their on-premises infrastructure and that the way they do business there, the ability to now move parts of that business into the cloud. And that's where you begin to see things like archiving, where certain records can be moved after a certain retention date, or in the case of disaster recovery, that one can literally almost flip a switch. Well, not almost, literally flip a switch to be up and running in the case of some kind of natural disaster. A particular case study we have in that area is with a company called Third Coast Terminals. They're in the petrochemicals industry, highly regulated, of course. They're based on the coast in Texas, so it's very much a hurricane-prone region. And the idea of having this ability to recover has been really key. So a lot of exciting dimensions to this, but I think we're finding that to be key drivers in our business for sure.
Yeah, and you're right about the hurricane-prone areas. I mean, this is something of great concern in relation to that. And, of course, one of the things that always comes up when we talk about cloud, or certainly in discussions that I've had about cloud, always comes back to governance and compliance issues. You know, and how do I align my cloud and all of the things that I'm trying to do in relation to this with governance and compliance? And one of the things that we found in the study that we had last year, Governance and Compliance Real World View, is 24%, or for 24% of the people that we talked with, said IG and data security is high on their priority list. You know, that they're very concerned about this and they're focused on that. 27% of the folks that we dealt with and that we talked with have plans to investigate and audit their information ecosystems. So they're actually going to go out there and start checking and looking into what they've got. So we also found out, and this was kind of an interesting thing that we found, is that respondents reported data loss due to staff negligence or bad practices, and that they also couldn't find records required for litigation. And this is an area where technology can certainly play a significant role in AIIM, as we see in point 4, to automate governance and compliance. You know, because there's this human factor, right? And what the people were telling us, it wasn't the technology that was at fault. They saw it as staff negligence. It was that human element. And so in that same report, we also found that automated tools are being used to tag, add, and enhance metadata based on specified sets of rules. And this is an area that many businesses, I think, could improve upon by using the technology to help them enhance those areas. And so I know that you guys really have a good focus on metadata and using the tools to do or help with governance and compliance. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, indeed. There's a lot of very interesting elements to that. Of course, metadata, I'll talk a little bit about that a little later in the presentation, but specifically around governance and compliance and what we're seeing in the market. And you know, we all know and see an increasing impact on regulations in the business environment. And we know the common ones around things like pharmaceutical manufacturing, life sciences, petrochemicals, mentioned financial. But it's becoming more broad and pervasive in businesses in general. And if not specific compliance from a regulated environment, in certain industries we play in, it can be around quality. You know, the notion of maintaining certain quality standards and complying with things like the ISO 9001 standard. For reference, Abbott Laboratories is a customer of ours, and we're one of their global quality management systems. So you can imagine that's quite deep regulated environment in which we play. Now, what's interesting here, and I believe we're leading this, so I'm not saying this is how it is for everyone, but I believe this is the trend and where businesses should look as they're asking or thinking about governance and compliance. Is, you know, in the past, this area was controlled by a very specialized workforce, you know, dedicated quality managers who controlled those processes and distributed them and tried to make sure that people followed them. But it was kind of siloed in that group, and it was a challenge, if you will, to really enforce that, a big initiative at least, to enforce that across your organization. And what we have seen and what we've also tried to drive is the notion of how do you ensure compliance while allowing business users to just work the way they normally work day to day. Not like, hey, I do my work and now I move over to make sure I'm following and checking the boxes on my compliance processes, but literally in the process of day-to-day work, capturing and monitoring and ensuring that compliance and governance policies are maintained. And we think that's the key, quite honestly. Think of it, it's like, it's like if you just live it in your day-to-day life, and that the way your processes are performed, the way information is tracked, your ability to quickly prove. Here's a very important element of this. Yes, complying is critical, but very often the process of complying and ensuring that you comply is one thing. The ability to prove that you are complying, even if you fully are, becomes a great burden on many companies. And so this idea that proof of compliance and audit becomes baked in the processes and procedures that individuals are following in their day-to-day work. I find that to be a really exciting element, because if you think about it, and maybe this is a little bit of an overused term, but the democratization of compliance and governance. Because what we have found also is that while these capabilities are crucial to companies in regulated or quality-sensitive environments, who would not benefit by ensuring that the right people are getting the right information, and only the right people, that they are performing tasks on time and in the approved fashion, that if there is a problem, and this is a key thing, that you know how to identify that problem and then identify a preventive action for moving forward. That's just, if you think about it, it's not this complex environment. I mean, it is in certain industries when you look at how it has to be reported, but from the basic principles of what delivers compliance and allows us to meet governance policies, those processes can benefit any business. So I think that if I would sum that up overall, it's the notion that governance and compliance is opening up to businesses at large and becoming more driven by business users rather than quality experts. There'll always be a place for the quality experts and a requirement, again, depending on industry. But the notion that the business teams are playing in this, in the processes that they know drive the business best, is a real key to how you want to think about driving and ensuring compliance, building it in from the ground up. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Bob.
Yep, and that's a great insight, because really, when you look at the organization as a whole, it should be a team effort, and that's really what you're talking about there. Is from the ground up, and absolutely the quality experts. There's always going to be a need for them, but we really do have to look at more holistically. And part of what you were talking about, focusing on the business processes. I mean, that's part of what it is too, and now these days we've got this whole concept of deep learning or machine learning, which can really be of great benefit. And one of the things that we found from our study, Improving Business Operations in 2017, capturing vital content, we found that respondents were starting to look more at content analytics as a way to help improve their process productivity, and actually start freeing up some bottlenecks and overloads. And this is one of the things that, I think is really kind of an interesting point, and brings us to the final point of AIIM, which is deep learning and machine learning. These are terms in an area that we're hearing more and more about, and we will be hearing a lot more about it in this coming year. This is where analytics and AI come together, and the whole concept of this is to learn from data and help make decisions or predict various outcomes. And I know I'm kind of oversimplifying this, but this is also where we're now seeing businesses take interest in using this approach to improve their business operations. And really, we're starting to see the idea of business process automation, the idea of businesses really leveraging these technologies to automate, in some cases, transactional processes more, but also the decision-making capabilities, leveraging decision-making processes within their business organizations a lot more as well. And this is something I think that is really, this leads us into this whole idea of innovation, right? And the idea of using technology in more innovative ways. And I know that you've got some great ideas and insights in this. And so why don't you share some of that with us?
Yeah. I said earlier that cloud is one of the more exciting areas of innovation in the market. This whole area of artificial intelligence is even more exciting, if I'm not going to get too hyperbolic there. But, a key element of this is that it's, we believe necessity is what's driving that innovation. We all have heard the stats around information just exploding, doubling every 18 months. I mean, I've actually heard that it doubles quite faster than that, but even think if it was at that level of frequency. And the notion that a vast, vast majority of that information is unstructured. So we all think about our CRMs and ERPs, which in HR systems, accounting systems, where we're dealing with this concept of structured data. But the notion of all the documents and files and images and et cetera, that we have to deal with as a business is where a huge challenge is increasing daily. And so that's where the necessity drives innovation. How do you deal with that? The traditional approaches, in our opinion, simply don't work. And their businesses have to rethink how they begin to kind of handle this challenge moving forward. And this is where artificial intelligence gets quite interesting, because imagine if that was happening for you in an intelligent and automated way, that being classification, kicking off workflows in an automated fashion, securing information based on what it is without having to explicitly or manually define that, gets very, very compelling. And this slide that we're showing here really speaks to our view looking forward, that there are three elements, three core pillars, if you will, of what we're talking about today as intelligent information management. And the first you mentioned a little bit earlier, Bob, about being metadata driven. I'm not going to go into this too deep, and often just the term metadata, eyes start to roll and gloss over, but we think of that simply as the idea of organizing, processing, securing, moving. We would call that replication, say from on-premises to the cloud or vice versa. Doing that based on what that information is and what it's related to, rather than where it is stored. So that is a foundation because it drives precision and flexibility. So imagine if we create a hierarchical system of folders or sites or libraries, or however we do that, we begin to emphasize putting information in a place, even if we're doing that virtually. But imagine that what's one of the first things you run into there? Things are often in more than one place. Hey, it's a contract that's related to a customer that sales might be interested in, but it's also important to legal because that contract is coming due or it's set to expire in the next month. Those are just two dramatically different roles and access to data. Well, the second element you see is about system neutral, and we'll talk a little bit about that a bit more, but if you think of the analogy or the metaphor, it's about what versus where. The notion of system neutral becomes really key. It doesn't matter what system it's in. Think if we really were striving for the ideal scenario as a user, I don't want to have to worry about, does that information sit in my SharePoint libraries, or is it sitting in Box for collaboration, or is it off in open text or in files for that matter? I'm focused on the context. I'm dealing with a customer. Show me this information that's important to me in that context. And then where the information is secondary and, in fact, not important to the user. Now, to the business, for governance or compliance purposes, that might be very important. But that's where we get to the idea of we remove that requirement from the user necessarily thinking about that. We allow them to work in context while we maintain that support underneath that the business requires. The third element, sorry, I took a little bit long to get here, is the intelligence piece. That's where the artificial intelligence. So imagine if you throw that into the mix now. I like to say this, and again, maybe I'm a little bit over the top here, but that's where the Holy Grail comes in. If you could automatically classify and relate information when it comes into your environment, regardless of the system it might come in within, if I'm making sense there, it might be in Box, it might be in SharePoint, it might be in a file share. And then I can automatically classify and relate it to the customer or the project or the case or the claim or 2 or 3 of those. Then you have this dynamic metadata-driven environment comes into its own. So AI, I would say, is really for us one of the most exciting parts of this industry, not maybe the most in terms of what it offers in looking forward in productivity. So really, really for us, a top priority. So.
Absolutely right on as far as, some of the points that you're making there. And so just to kind of recap, going back to our initial points of discussion with AIIM, the key elements, rationalizing and modernizing the information infrastructure, the idea that we need to look forward. We need to identify those elements of the information infrastructure and modernize wherever we possibly can, leveraging things like cloud and mobile and the things like AI, for example, digitalizing our core business processes. There's still a lot of manual processes that are out there. And this is one of those things that I think a lot of business organizations, when they step back and they really take a hard look at what's going on, truly what's going on in their operations today, they find it surprising how much manual intervention and human intervention there is still today in their business operations. Optimizing collaborative environments for customer and employee experience. Collaboration, what does that mean in different businesses? And optimizing it, what is it going to take to do that? Setting up these different environments and leveraging these various tools that are available to us. And not just the employees, but the customer experience. Being able to leverage various tools to interact with the customer, not just the employees. And automating governance and compliance, trying to bring us into a better situation, to give us strength in those areas. To be able to take out that human element. As we saw in some of the statistics, it's that human factor that becomes the risk. And then, of course, leveraging deep learning and machine learning capabilities wherever we can. Leveraging the idea of the use of AI and analytics to give us greater insight and greater capabilities. Again, to automate wherever we can. And not just automate the steps of a process or transactional, but also decision-making capabilities. And so some thoughts and things to consider as you go forward, you're taking the next step for those friends that are watching and visiting with us today. By all means, come back to AIM and take a look at some of the resources that we have, the research that we provide, the learning experiences and the tools, and these webinars, by all means. And these webinars, we do have ways that you can watch them after the fact. If you know somebody that should have been here or you feel that would have benefited from this, by all means, there is a playback after this. There's the resource list right now that you can access some of the materials, and you can get some of the materials and share it with folks. Attending the annual conference in San Antonio, I know that sounds like a shameless ad, but by all means, the conference is a great place to not only find educational opportunities and learn and interact with some of the providers out there like M-Files, but also to network and build up your network of peers. And of course, talk with the suppliers and service providers and pick their brains. They're in the field every day. They're working with customers like you, and they see a lot of things. And they see a lot of situations, and so that's one of the best places to go. Ask them a lot of questions. The other thing that I always like to say is pick one thing that we discussed today and bring that back into your organization to improve your information management processes and practices. Even if it's just one thing that stuck with you, go back to your organization and leverage that, right? And begin with that and say, let's try this. Let's begin here today. And then finally, IIM, Intelligent Information Management, really begins with you. It's what you take away from this today. It focuses on you, and really think about your position, right, in business. And think about where you sit. You're the center of the universe as far as the information that you use. And really, no matter where you are on the planet, above the planet, and the information that you need to get to and the processes that you interact with, it really should be you're the center focus. And no matter whether the information is on-premise, whether it's in the cloud, the processes that you deal with, all of that really should be accessible to you where you are when you need it. And this is really some of the key. And so intelligent information management really should center around that. It should center around the user. And so with that, I'm going to bring it back to Greg and kind of get your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we would agree strongly this notion of not being, as I kind of stated earlier, being focused on, from a user perspective, necessarily where information is, and just focusing on its context and how it relates to me, how it's relevant to my task at hand. And this picture that we're showing here, I think, kind of captures that we're putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak. The notion that one could directly connect to the unstructured and structured. Notice Salesforce is in there as well as other ERPs and CRMs. But the notion that one can connect into that data contextually. And there's two elements there that play a real key role in this. One of them is the notion of where migration fits and its priority. Imagine, I would say confidently in almost every deployment we've ever done, migration has been an important topic, because typically systems don't add value, at least in our space, to the information until the data is moved into that system. In fact, in BoxWorks, I'm going to reference an example here. Their chief product officer literally made the statement that information in Box is infinitely more valuable than information not in Box. So the corollary is also true. Information not in Box, in their view, is infinitely less valuable. Infinite might mean it's not valuable at all. That is diametrically opposed to the way we're looking at the market, that information can be in Box. It's great if you're utilizing Box. That's a great thing, but it's not a requirement that it be there. And when you think about migration, imagine if the first step was not having to move data, that you could literally begin to access it, enrich it, and utilize it. That removes a huge stumbling block to innovation. And moreover, imagine what it does to change management as well. Well, migration is a task in its own right, but now you move the data, let's say, if you're taking a traditional approach, you got to teach everybody who is using the old systems how to use the new system. And that's even often a stronger point of resistance. How do you get the rest of the company to gear up to innovations in how the company works? So how does innovation start? Where does it start? It doesn't start in lockstep across the organization. It often starts in pockets of groups who are analyzing a given process or a need, and they innovate. And if they can do that freely, decoupling from disruption to existing processes and systems, you've now removed a second huge stumbling block to innovation. So very exciting future, but it's about what and not where, and system neutral is just such a key part of the way we see the market. And I would argue if you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant as well, they've begun to caution vendors and, of course, also credit vendors for this component of their strategy. And this is an element of a core piece of how they define content services. So very, very interesting element. I would just move on and say if these topics are interesting, there's a link in the resource list that you can go and check out information around this intelligent information management vision, nice overview video. There's also an infographic and a white paper to help provide additional insight. So please feel free to access that information at your convenience, and hopefully it will help you in your assessment of how to deploy intelligent information management in 2018 and beyond. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Teresa and see if we have any questions that we can address.
That we do. Thank you. We've been listening to Greg Milliken of M-Files and Bob Larrabee of AIIM. And just before we hop into the questions, Greg was mentioning resources, and there's a few extra resources in that list off to the right, in addition to the really cool things that M-File has there. I took a look at that, their paper and the infographic. It was very good. Also, there is the link in there for the Intelligent Information Management, AIIM's. I thought it was just going to be one paper that I had there to post, but we have 3 papers available to you. So if you go to AIIM.org/IIM, or that AIM ebook link in the resources list, it's going to take you where you can download all 3 of these papers, and that digitally transformative year paper is downloadable right now. Sorry for that hiccup earlier in the hour. But avail yourself of this resource. Bob Larrabee mentioned the AIM conference, AIM.org/conference, or AIMconference.com. The early bird registration pricing ends in 1 week from today. So do take a look at this. Reach out if you have any questions about that. Some folks from AIM can answer more of your questions about that fabulous opportunity there. Do you want to take a couple of the questions here? And Bob, let me start this first question over to you. Someone asked very early into the presentation today, which is the cart and which is the horse? Developing a complete governance and compliance policy, or purchasing and developing a tool set? At what point into data governance development should you start looking at tool sets? Can you offer some guidance here?
That's an interesting
Big question, I know.
Yeah. In a lot of cases, there is some form of governance in an organization, although it may not be obvious. I would say probably the best bet is you try to find whatever governance there is, governance and compliance policy there is, and depending on what you find, start looking at tool sets as well. I would say probably the best approach that I've seen is you try to do it in parallel based on what you have in relation to governance and compliance policies and build upon that. If you have absolutely nothing for governance and compliance policies, then what I would do is try to at least establish some type of framework to get yourself going, and at minimal, some type of framework before you start using some tool sets. You've got to put some rules in place and some policies in place, because the tools by themselves are not going to set policy. You have to have policies and guidelines first.
And I would think part of that would also come from getting the right team together from the various departments and legal and records and the stakeholders, and to flesh all of that out to come up with a governance set.
Yeah, yeah.
I would also add to that I do think the defining the policy leads the tool set, but I think, Bob, you made a great point that it often happens in parallel. What I would emphasize is that starting simple, the question as I saw it was a complete governance and compliance policy. And that's not to say that we wouldn't strive for completeness or accuracy, but I think the idea is to start and get the basic elements in place. What the basis of quality or compliance can be built around standard operating procedures. This is what you need to do, and these people need to be trained in that. When you start from that sort of build it up, start simple, that creates a great foundation that leads to that complete policy, if you will. So I think your comment about doing it in parallel was dead on.
I have another question that's come in here, and Greg, that you mentioned that in one of your slides here, you mentioned that our industry is lagging to move to the cloud, and Bob had also said that he sees some of the reasons as the governance and compliance. Are you seeing any other factors or obstacles that organizations are facing for moving to the cloud? What are some of the things that organizations need to prepare for, look out for?
Yeah, sometimes and often, I think as Bob's point about governance and compliance being a driver of that is indeed true. We see that, but very often it's not substantive, because what that means is not that one cannot maintain governance policies or ensure compliance if they're using the cloud. It just might mean the company has a fear, and that's increasingly less critical. Think of when we moved to online banking. Everybody had lots of issues with that and challenges. Should I be able to get to my money that way? That's insecure. When quickly we begin to find out, wait a minute, that's way more secure than what I thought I was doing internally. When you look at one of the key elements, I think, Bob, you made this point as well, where you break down on governance and compliance, it's more about individual behavior very often than it is some nefarious character cracking into your systems or something like that. What we find is it's really that. It's a mindset, and it's, sort of a sense that, wait a minute, this is just something we're not quite ready to do. And I'm not downplaying that as important, but I would argue that we think is the overall driver, that organizations just don't want their information to be out somewhere else. They think somebody's going to come get it. Sometimes that's explicitly about compliance and governance, but other times it's just about wanting to retain that control and protection. And when one really looks into these cloud-based platforms, we particularly are emphasizing Azure with Microsoft, but others, AWS and others have similar capabilities. The ability to secure and maintain and document and maintain the sort of characteristics that would allow to prove that governance and compliance is being met is actually far greater in these environments. So,
yeah, I would agree. It's more the human factor and the comfort level, I think. But absolutely.
Okay. We are getting to the end of our webinar time here today. Just to answer one other question that someone had put in here, another resource is AIIM's training offers an entire program on information governance. I don't have a link to it in the resources, but if you go to the AIIM website or aim.org/training, and there is a deep dive course on information governance, so that's something else to consider to help you through your own work and planning within your organization. So just wanted to mention that out there to everyone. We have been recording this webinar, and it is going to be available in the next day or so, and we will be emailing everyone when that link is available. So come back, listen to our talk again, invite your colleagues to listen to it. It was a really good talk today, and I enjoyed hearing what Greg and Bob had to say. As I mentioned, there are the resources available to you. Also, a survey is going to open on your desktop when we're done, or you can click on that right now in the widgets at the bottom of the page. But just because we are at the end of our hour, very much want to thank our underwriter, M-Files. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM would not be able to bring you these free educational programs like our webinars. So thank you, M-Files, for your sponsorship. And as we do bring the webinar to a close, I want to leave you with our speakers' closing thoughts or key takeaways. And let me start first with Greg Milliken of M-Files. Your closing thoughts today.
Well, yeah, I would just again say thanks for your time, and I would encourage that there's a lot of things happening that are creating new approaches to how we manage and process information as businesses. And 2018 is a really pivotal year, I think, to if not take the plunge in some of these new technologies, cloud and how it enables mobile or artificial intelligence, et cetera, to really begin to dig into how those might impact your business. And there's a lot of alternatives there on the market. So, yes, M-Files does this, but other vendors do as well. I would just really emphasize that the market's changing. It's changing relatively quickly, and the new approaches, we believe, are what are required to really meet the needs of this dramatically more complex and dynamic environment every year, it seems to. So I would just encourage you to start this journey now.
Thank you, Greg. And Bob Larrabee from AIIM, your closing thoughts today.
Yeah, I would second what Greg said. The journey starts now. In AIIM, take the first step. Start looking at the different processes that you have. Look at the steps that we talked about today, rationalizing, digitalizing, optimizing, all of those different elements, and take the first steps. Get your feet wet and pick something in your organization to start focusing on. And do, by all means, talk to the different suppliers out there and look at the different technologies and look at different ways that you can leverage these and bring them into your organization to improve and optimize your operations and your businesses. And, if you have questions, talk to the suppliers, come to AIIM. We're all here to help you.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everyone, for your time today. For AIIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we'll see you on our next webinar. And have a good day.